On today's first episode of the Original Medicine podcast, we're talking about why everything you know about acupuncture is a lie. Now, when I first started school, I was introduced to this idea when an administrator and a teacher sat us down as new students and explained how TCM, or traditional Chinese medicine, was created. And so I want to explain that to you so that if you have been disappointed with the results that you got when you sought out acupuncture, as I also was, you will know the difference. You will know what to look for. You will know what questions to ask, and you'll have a different perspective coming away from this episode, I think. So to get into it, traditional Chinese medicine was created when Mao took over China in the 1950s. So when you hear people say acupuncture has been practiced for thousands of years, that is not true based on what is practiced today. That is true that acupuncture is a part of Chinese medicine, and Chinese medicine dates back thousands of years. Yes, that part is true. But the acupuncture that is practiced today, the acupuncture that is taught in schools across the world, including in China, was developed in the 90s by the Imperial Academy, who was Mao's cabinet, essentially. So when he took over China, he banned the practice of acupuncture altogether. And then after a period of time, people were really getting sick because China is a large country. This was a major form of healthcare for them. So he said to his cabinet, I want you to create a system where we can train people who are not medical doctors or acupuncturists, and they can go out into cities and villages across China and help people who need it. So this is what they did. These were called barefoot doctors, in case you want to look this up and learn more about it than I'm going to go into today. It's very interesting, but also very disappointing. And we'll get to the disappointing part later. TCM helps tons of people. It has been helpful for me in my very first acupuncture experience, but it leaves a lot on the table. And I want to get into more of that in a second. But first, TCM is a cookbook, essentially. They're recipes that are based on people's symptoms. So this barefoot doctor could go into a village and say, how can I help you? And the person might say, I have digestive problems, bloating, gas, loose stools. I'm tired all the time. And the barefoot doctor would use points that were designed to treat those symptoms. Now, the barefoot doctor may not understand what exactly is happening, but just knows to needle this point, that point, that point, okay? And in many cases, that is helpful. However, what we need to understand is what was left behind when TCM was created so that we understand when we don't get good results at acupuncture, what is often missing. So fast forward several years, I was a patient in the school clinic getting TCM treatments, and I was having really bad migraines. They were getting worse and worse. I started with migraines when I was 10 years old. They were off and on my whole life, periods of time where I would get them, periods of time where they would go away. When I was in acupuncture school, they got pretty bad. And I felt that the treatments were making them worse. And I too was reading the textbooks that said, this is what you do when people have these symptoms. And it was not working. So finally, I just said, I'm done with this. And I was getting very overwhelmed by LA in general. And I moved back to New Mexico at this point. And I was about to start my clinical rotations. And at this point, I met a clinic supervisor at Southwest Acupuncture College, which is where I did my last 2 years and where I graduated from. And I was telling her, about what I had learned in school in California. And additionally, I had had some teachers who studied with Jeffrey Yuen. And so they would talk about him. He is an 88th generation Taoist priest, and he is a lineage holder of Chinese medicine that was left out of the classic texts. So he's like a direct line through his family, and he was taught by his grandfather, and he is my teacher's teacher. My amazing teacher is Ann Cecil Sturman, and she studied with him for 2 decades. And then she worked at his school when it was open in New York City. And she has an amazing ability to distill large, very complicated bodies of information into very digestible, understandable tidbits. And I would call them tidbits at this point because it is just massive amount of information that Jeffrey Yuen has and holds in his mind. And to be able to learn from him is really quite amazing. And sometimes people come away from classes with him not really knowing how to go right into the clinic and use it. And this was this has been like a tremendous benefit to the world, really, that she is offering. And that's how I have learned what I know. And I know that was a little bit of a sidestep to talking about how I got from attending acupuncture school to being very unhappy with what I was learning. But I just saw it failing. And I knew that there was more because I had heard just enough to know that something else was behind the curtain. And so when I got to Southwest Acupuncture School and I met my very dear clinical supervisor, Susan Plord, she said to me, "You're spot on. And I want to tell you about Ann Cecil Sturman. She has just written a book detailing all of the stuff that you're asking about. And she and another colleague in New Mexico were bringing her out to teach for the first time outside of New York ever. And she said, you should sign up for the class." Now, I'm a third year acupuncture student trying to keep my head above water, learning herbs, learning acupuncture, doing clinicals, all the things, working as well. And I think to myself, how am I going to even survive like taking this class? Will I know enough? What? I don't know, but I had to, right? So I signed up for the class, and Susan Plord, my clinical supervisor, was in the class, fortunately. On Monday morning, I went into class having learned the sinew channels, and a 94-year-old patient shows up on my schedule. She had had back surgery many years before and had been golden for years, but all of a sudden she was in so much pain. She was using a cane. She was in near tears, telling us what was going on. I said, "This is a sinew issue." And my supervisor agreed. And she said, "Go for it." I did the sinew treatment and she basically skipped out of the office. Like, she felt amazing. That right then and there, it was done for me. I was never going back. So obviously I had to finish TCM school in order to get a license, but I did that to meet the requirements. And all of my time outside of that, and even inside of school, I would sit with the Red Book. If you're an acupuncturist listening to this and you also study with Anne, you know the Red Book. For those of you not, her first book that she published is called Advanced Acupuncture, and it's a clinical manual that details how to use these channels, and everyone just calls it the Red Book. Anyway, the Red Book is like my, if your house was on fire, what's the one thing you would grab? That is my book. So this just became the path that I was on, and I couldn't get off it if I tried. So let's get into more about the complement channels themselves. Okay, so I've already explained to you that TCM was a point prescription, like a cookbook that we could apply based on symptoms reported by the patient. But what happens when those symptoms are not getting better when you're using those point prescriptions? And also, how do we know that everyone with those symptoms has the same underlying pathology? And this is my beef with traditional Chinese medicine, because it is not acknowledging true Chinese medicine. Okay, so prior to Mao taking over China, we had the complete system of acupuncture. This meant that we had the primary channels. Those are the 12 channels that I'm sure you've heard of. They sound like things that you would recognize in allopathic medicine: the liver, the lung, the large intestine, the spleen, the stomach, that kind of thing. And then you had the complement channels. So the primary channels govern the 24/7 function of the body. They keep us alive. They keep us breathing. They keep us going to the bathroom, eating, digesting our food, all the things. Something that is often forgotten in TCM, which I'll just start calling modern acupuncture because it is a modern invention created in the 1950s. Modern acupuncture pays lip service to the fact that emotions affect the body, but it does not dive deeply into that. And why that's important is that the role of the primary channels is to express the emotion. And when that cannot happen, that looks like a threat to survival. So when the body experiences something that it feels is a threat to survival, the complement channels swoop in and they whisk it away and store it to preserve life, literally to save your life. So from a classical Chinese medicine perspective, chronic degenerative disease is literally there for your benefit. This is not like positive psychology bullshit. This is literally Chinese medicine physiology. The body has moved that pathology and put it into a deep level to hold it there with the expectation that you are going to address your emotional profile, your emotional experiences that you have not processed. You are going to address the fact that you are burning the candle at both ends. You are not eating well, sleeping well, recovering well. You are not nourishing yourself. So we're going to create arthritis, for example. We're going to slow you down because your knees are going to now hurt. But what do we do in modern America? We just take 4 ibuprofen and keep going, right? We just slap an ice pack on the knee and we keep going. We don't slow down at all because we've got to play that soccer game. We've got to be at the gym. We've got to go to work. We've got to take care of our families. We are not slowing down because of any joint pain. That is not getting us down, right? That's the mentality in modern America. The complement channels are there to save your life, and they do this using mediumship. So as I mentioned before, arthritis is there to slow us down so that we will rebuild that medium and we will not have pain anymore because the body will either be able to continue storing the pathology or it will be able to release it. And that is way above our pay grades as acupuncturists to know what will happen. But to the patient, they will have no more arthritis if they are able to rebuild their mediumship. Now, this comes in two folds because you need a divergent treatment to rebuild mediumship, but you also need lifestyle changes. So continuing to burn the candle at both ends, to not eat warm and wet foods, to do all these depleting things like drinking coffee and alcohol and eating tons of processed food and sugar and hot spicy things and garlic and onions. Those things no one wants to give up, but they are extremely depleting. So because the mediumship is being depleted, you are now getting arthritis, what you call arthritis. You're getting knee pain or hip pain or shoulder pain as a result of the fact that you are burning through your resources. Okay, so let's compare this to going into a modern acupuncturist office and saying that you have knee pain and you need help with that. They are using primary channels because that is what we were taught in school. And that acupuncturist is now putting in needles into primary channels that, one, do not have anything to do with joint pain. Primary channels are governing the function of the 24/7 function of the body, keeping you alive. They have nothing to do with knee pain. And those channels directly communicate with the organs. So when that acupuncturist puts in needles and says, this will help your knee pain go away, they are giving that pathology a straight shot to the organ. So the patient leaves and says, wow, my knees feel so much better. And then when they come back the next week, they say, the weirdest thing happened. I got a bladder infection over the weekend. It's not weird at all because the acupuncturist unknowingly gave the pathology a direct path to the organ. Now that person has a bladder infection because the divergents are now involved, and the divergents do not have enough medium to hold that pathology away. And that's why the bladder organ was affected. Okay, so I know I'm getting a little bit into the weeds here, but the point is modern acupuncture is operating in a place where the pathology is not any longer. Now, if you have never had loose stools in your life and today you wake up and you have diarrhea, that might be a time to use modern acupuncture. Go in and get a treatment for your digestive organs, and it probably will work perfectly and you are in the clear, no problem. If you have had digestive problems off and on your entire life, I'm not saying that the primary channels will not be able to help you with that, but that is not an appropriate treatment because the problems that you have been having off and on for your entire life are in the complement channels. The problem is there. So that's why we need to be treating there. And the fact that people get results in a modern acupuncture clinic, but they are not sustained results, shows you this. So when you treat the primary channels, it gives them a little boost and it does support them. So your symptoms go away. And that's great. Many people report having their symptoms go away while they're being treated, but they say that if they stop going, then their symptoms return. This is not what we want. My job is always to work myself out of a job. I want to reverse the pathology process so that you no longer need acupuncture. And this is what we do in the complement channels because it is possible. That is where the pathology has been held for all this time. So we treat that channel and we determine that channel by using dynamic pulse taking, not by symptom reporting. So two patients could come into my office and tell me virtually the same thing, and they may get drastically different treatments, because when I feel their pulse, it tells me what is true for them and what is their root cause versus what primary channel or what organ I think is affected based on their symptoms. I'm hoping that this is not getting too into the weeds and too much jargon, but I think it's really important for you to hear the difference in how modern acupuncture is practiced versus how classical Chinese medicine was practiced, because in many, many, many cases, people are not getting better with modern acupuncture. And I'm not saying this to disparage the hardworking, genuine, good-hearted people that are practicing modern acupuncture across the world. This is not a profession that you go into for prestige. We are having to fight for a place in modern healthcare. So it's not something that people go into without truly loving it and caring about the people that they work with on a daily basis. But many, I would venture to say most acupuncturists are unaware of this because their school did not give them the talk that I had the very first day. I'm so thankful that I heard that the very first day. And then throughout my first 2 years at Emperor's, I had teachers that had studied with Jeffrey Yuen, and they would talk about this in class. They would talk about, okay, the TCM says XYZ, but really the Chinese medicine says this, but okay, we have to get back to TCM because you have to take a board exam and all that kind of stuff. And it's true. This is what you have to learn for a board exam. But I've always been really concerned about healing myself and healing my patients. And so it was never going to be acceptable for me to treat based on what I learned in school, because now I know better and I want you to know better. And I want other acupuncturists to know better, because I'm a big believer that a rising tide floats all boats. If we can bring everyone into this circle and learn classical Chinese medicine, we can elevate our profession through better helping people. If everyone that goes to an acupuncturist gets amazing results and full healing as we know it is possible, think what that does for our profession. So whether you're listening as a layperson or an acupuncturist, I hope that this discussion is helping you understand the difference and what modern acupuncture is leaving out. And if you're a practitioner, I really hope that this draws you into this circle and lets you know that there's so much more that you can be doing for your patients just by diving into this information. And so I want to leave you with some resources too. As I mentioned before, my teacher is Ann Cecil Sturman. She's been my primary teacher. I've been studying with her since 2014. And fortunately, I met her in the midst of my schooling. And I also studied with Sean Tootin, and he was teaching prior to meeting Ann Cecil Sturman as well. But his teaching now is also based on her teachings, as he and I met in a class with her back in 2014. And so I would say those two have been my primary teachers, and they're wonderful teachers, both of them. They both have mentorships. They're both very different, but both very good. And I have also begun teaching just a bit and hope to expand that more in the coming year. Again, you can learn more by listening to this podcast. We're going to get into different topics. This was the overview, and I want future episodes to be a bit shorter so they can be easily digestible. But I hope you'll come back for more, and we'll continue this conversation.